Okay, good morning, everyone. Today we're here to talk about prepaid within Canada, the opportunity that it presents, and its role within the Canadian payment systems, knowing who the audience is. My name is David Eason. I'm the chairman of the Canadian Prepaid Providers Organization. On stage with me is Tom McTague from MasterCard and Peter Reid from People's Trust. And what we're hoping to do today is, number one, give you an introduction to prepaid within Canada, some facts and figures that the prepaid organization has come up with. Then we wanted to give you a perspective of prepaid from the key stakeholders within the ecosystem. So Tom, being with MasterCard, is going to give a network point of view in terms of how prepaid fits in Canada and how that compares to the rest of the world. And then Peter Reid from People's Card Services is going to give the issuer's perspective of the requirements of prepaid within Canada and how it fits into the payment system. And then myself, I will kind of sum it up from an industry perspective and from a program manager perspective. We've got a relatively small group here, so what we're going to ask is, if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them as we go along. And we can address them at that point of time when we're talking about the points. Okay. So, being a not-for-profit organization, we are big on polling and data. So we've got a number of polls throughout the presentation today. So we're going to ask you to open up your devices, go through the polls now. I think we've got a total of 5 or 6 questions. If you can, please answer them all at once so that when we actually get to them, we'll actually have the facts and figures up on the screen, and we don't have to wait for that. Now, this is a bit of an unusual question, but bear with us. There's a reason behind it, and once we get the results, we can actually speak to that. Okay, so like I said, this is a bit of a unique crowd because everyone's within payments and they probably understand payments a lot more. So it's good to know that there is more positive sentiment towards prepaid than negative. But there has been some negative sentiment towards prepaid based upon some erroneous facts and figures coming from the media sometimes, and some industry practices that happened early on that have since been adjusted and regulated. So we'll get to that. So about the Canadian Prepaid Providers Organization. So we're a not-for-profit organization. We launched about a year ago, and we're a collection of the largest, most of the largest anyways, industry players within prepaid. And our goal is to promote the education and awareness of open loop prepaid to all stakeholders within the industry, whether it be cardholders, consumers, businesses, or government organizations. We actually provide services to the financial organizations within our membership for collection of sharing ideas and exchange of ideas to help us enhance the product offerings that we have. So what is open loop prepaid? It's very important to delineate between open loop and closed loop prepaid, and those are very much an industry term. Closed loop prepaid are in essence the store cards, the Starbucks cards, the Home Depots, the kegs, if you will. The problem is that when people refer to prepaid, quite often those store cards are kind of looped in with open loop prepaid cards, yet they're vastly, vastly different. Open loop prepaid cards are the ones that are on a network such as MasterCard, American Express, and Visa, and they must be issued by financial institutions. The store cards do not. And as such, they come with a whole set of regulations for abiding by anti-money laundering protection, privacy requirements, know your customer requirements, as well as all the fraud and loss protection that you would normally get from a network card. And as such, there's very different financials that are placed on this industry versus a closed loop industry. So it's important for us to try to communicate those to stakeholders so that they actually understand the difference between the two. And the other thing is how prepaid fits into the industry is the products that have been out for a long time are the credit and debit products, which are in essence pay later credit, pay now debit. Where prepaid fits in is it's pay before. And as we go through the presentation, you're going to see there's all kinds of unique uses for pay before that pay now and pay later do not service. So now how prepaid gets to market. Again, when you talk to the average consumer, they're not really too sure who is giving the card out. Is it the financial institution that does it? Is it the network that sends out the cards, or is it another body? And the answer is that it's actually a collection of a number of key stakeholders: processors, card manufacturers, the issuer of the network, and program managers. And program managers are actually quite unique to the payment ecosystem, that you don't necessarily have those with credit or debit, since the financial institutions take care of those. But within prepaid, program managers are organizations that could be resident within a network or with an issuer, or a completely separate entity that actually collates all of the work from all the stakeholders and makes it as seamless as possible to the end merchant or the consumer. So next poll was, and hopefully you guys have filled it out, is how many categories of prepaid cards are there? And if we can just look at what those results are. So 3 to 5 being the predominant. What's interesting about prepaid, and it's a challenge that we'll discuss, is prepaid fits into a category where the existing payment systems, such as credit or debit, currently don't effectively service the market. In credit, you typically have 2 major categories. You've got the commercial card and the personal card. In prepaid, in Canada, we have about 11 segments. The ones in the black font are the ones that are currently being readily serviced within Canada. A general purpose reloadable card, so that's individuals' cards where they can load money on a regular basis. And then we've got the corporate disbursement cards, whether they act as corporate incentives, employee incentives, consumer rebates. Open loop gift cards are the ones that you will see in retailers typically, where you can put $50 or $100 or $200 on cards. Those have been quite prevalent throughout the last 8 years, and then travel cards are emerging. Where we're kind of behind the game and areas for opportunity for us are in payroll. There are still tens of billions of dollars being issued to Canadians. That's not in the form of direct deposit, so it's either in the form of check and cash. And for whatever reason, those individuals are looking for receiving funds outside of their bank accounts. So prepaid provides a great opportunity to provide better services of secure funds in electronic format that's faster. Student and teen cards, people who don't have credit cards, who could use it for budgeting purposes. Government disbursements for people who don't or are underbanked within the market right now, for means of getting payment to them versus sending checks, which are wrought with all kinds of problems. So a lot of different types of uses. So now, why open loop in Canada? Why is open loop emerging in Canada? We're a heavily banked society versus many other geographies. But as we said, cash is still extremely prevalent within our country. I think there was a stat that 44% of all transactions are still cash-based. And as we know, there's all kinds of problems with cash. So open loop services all these categories that you previously saw in terms of the digitization of the currency in ways that either cash, debit, or credit are limited right now. So it's a way to send out electronic payments that's not attached to credit and is not attached to your own bank account, that then provides all the security that the network branded cards offer for individuals: lost and stolen protection, fraud protection, and the ability to do online payments. So obviously it tackles a lot of the hassles that we have with cash and checks. and solves a bunch of unique demands that consumers have, whether they're looking for cards for budgetary purposes, for travel purposes, or just as a means to engage with merchants. So now, how does Canada compare right now? So the Canadian Prepaid Providers Organization, in conjunction with their McTague group, did the actual first market sizing study to find out how much money is being loaded on. So right now we're at $3 billion. So that's pretty much going from 0 8 years ago to $3 billion. So in terms of the rate of growth, it's been quite rapid, but we still are quite small within the payments ecosystem in Canada. But again, we're still relatively new, and the growth is quite strong. The largest segment is in the general purpose reloadable cards. And these are the cards that people are opting to use to make their purchases and their transactions. These are the ones that can be reloaded on a regular basis through their own financial institution, or through bill payment, or organizations such as LoadHub that can put cash directly onto the cards, and you can transact it in on a prepaid card. What's interesting, though, is if you look at the market share within Canada and how the Canadian financial system is dominated by the large 6 banks in Canada, that's not the case with prepaid. And in fact, over half of the $3.1 billion is actually being serviced by smaller financial institutions who have proven to be more flexible, probably a bit quicker with innovation, to be able to get the cards into market. So there still is a lot of opportunity for growth within prepaid in Canada. You'll see the stat there. The United States, $264 billion in prepaid. Right? And typically with market sizing, and luckily it's simple math, we typically look at the United States and divide by 10, right? And we say, well, that's what our market share should be in terms of the commerce being done. But prepaid is slightly different. The United States has a much higher underbanked or unbanked market. In fact, their unbanked and underbanked market size is greater than double the population of Canada. Right, so that's how prepaid first started emerging with the United States, and that's why it's taken off much faster. But as it's gained in popularity, they've realized that there's so many other uses for prepaid that currently isn't being serviced by the system, such as healthcare, insurance, government disbursements, et cetera. Okay, the next poll is prepaid cards are loosely controlled and have higher degree of fraud. We'll see what the response is on that. So 25% say yes. We do have a lot of regulations, and Peter is going to address that when he speaks about it. And with respect to a higher rate of fraud, there actually have been studies that show that the fraud on prepaid cards are significantly less than in the categories of credit and debit. And in fact, when talking to some of the policing organizations within Canada, they've reported that there's been almost no fraud in the last 4 years with respect to organized crime, and rates of hacking in and greater degree of fraud, which is good. But there is that conception out there that we don't have the controls in place to monitor that effectively. Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to Tom McTague now from MasterCard, and he's going to talk about how Canada compares to the rest of the world and how prepaid fits in within our ecosystem. So, Tom.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everybody. Canada is very fortunate, right? We're very fortunate to have a very advanced society, technologically, socially, economically, politically. We're also very fortunate to have very strong infrastructure in the payment space, which definitely helped contribute to our high standard of living through the 20th century and to now. Canadians, as I'm sure you're aware, are among the most avid users of digital channels for financial services. We have the highest rate of electronic payment use as a percentage of our personal consumption expenditure, PCE, globally. Australia is number 2. We're at 55%, by the way, the stat. Australia is at 52%, and the US is at 30%. So we're heads and tails above and very advanced in that sense. Payments Canada, Canadian Payments Trends 2015, talks about growth rates in electronic payments as well as paper-based payments. And depending on the type of payment, electronic payments is growing anywhere between 17 and 184% per year in terms of volume, whereas paper-based payments are dropping anywhere between 16 and 20%. And Canadians have embraced contactless card payments. They embraced them early and eagerly, reigning in the #1 spot globally in terms of contactless transaction penetration for quite some time. And we're now currently still in the top 2 to 3 globally. And Dave touched on our banked population. We are among the highest in terms of the banked population. According to the World Bank, we're somewhere around 99%. So that's basically fully banked. But Canada risks becoming a laggard. Think about these pieces of information. In Singapore, 83% of mobile phone users have a smartphone. In Canada, the number is somewhere in the mid-60s, according to eMarketer. Canadians' use of e-commerce lags somewhere around 5% of retail sales versus global average around 8%. And the Canadian government still issues, the federal government still issues somewhere in the order of $7 billion a year in benefits disbursements to citizens by check. In the US, checks have virtually been eliminated in terms of federal payments. If we're going to keep pace, we need to do a few key things. We need to embrace payment innovation. I think that's why we're all here. We need to balance the needs of the stakeholders while putting consumers at the center. And we need to make room for alternative players to play in the space and be successful. Other parts of the world are, frankly, unconstrained by legacy infrastructure. And while it's been a blessing to us and gotten us to this point, the fact is that not having infrastructure and, frankly, having some very compelling needs in many other countries, such as financial inclusion, some countries are actually leapfrogging us in some ways. If you look at the report, The Way We Pay, from the Task Force on the Payment System Review, they say, in countries much less affluent than our own, mobile payments are exploding. While Canadians are still reaching for change to feed parking meters, citizens elsewhere accomplish the same task with the tap of a cell phone or a text message. Dave touched a little bit on credit cards. Of course, the Canadian marketplace is extremely mature in terms of use of credit cards. If you look at a few countries around the world, and I've taken a quick sample and looked at the amount of prepaid dollar volume or currency volume versus consumer credit, Egypt, 4 times more prepaid. Zimbabwe and Senegal, 18 times more prepaid volume than credit volume. So that gives you a sense for how prepaid has been employed to address many needs, and it's effectively becoming the de facto electronic payment tool in many places. A few examples to think about. In Kenya and Tanzania in 2007, so 9 years ago, a system called M-Pesa was launched. Many of you have probably heard of M-Pesa, mobile money, right? Send money back and forth using effectively text messages. Identification combined with social payments. Nigeria has a national ID program that combines an ID card with a form of payment for the delivery of government funds. You may have heard of the South Africa Social Security Program, SASSA, which provides biometrically verified identity and proof of life on an ongoing basis, as well as a payment card for the delivery of benefits to people in need. Aid, prepaid is actually being used to deliver aid. For example, the Save the Children program in Yemen, where 41% of the population is unable to meet their basic needs. And frankly, the electronic payment acceptance infrastructure isn't what we enjoy here. In that case, prepaid cards are being issued, but the unit of measure, the currency on the card, isn't actually fiat currency. It's items like food and clothing that the card can actually be redeemed for directly. And then a little closer to home, digital banking. Dave mentioned general purpose cards. In some places, right on our doorstep in the United States, some very interesting platforms have emerged using effectively a general purpose reloadable type of prepaid platform, but adding all sorts of additional benefits to the consumer on top of that. Examples like Simple and GoBank, On Budget, and even Bluebird. In Canada, we heard from Daniel Eberhardt, who started Coho. That's a domestic example of that type of a solution, which helps not only people, especially millennials, transact the way they want to, but also, frankly, helps them with budgeting and financial literacy. So again, if we're going to keep pace here in Canada, we need to embrace payments innovation. We need to balance the needs of all of the stakeholders, making sure we keep the consumer at the center of our focus. And we need to ensure that we have room for alternative players in the marketplace so that they can thrive. We're going on to the next poll question. So, true or false, you don't need to be a regulated financial institution to issue prepaid cards in Canada? Let's see what we come up with. Interesting split, okay. Well, fortunately, we have Peter Reid, President of People's Card Services, to take us through the next section and fill us in on that. Peter.
Thank you, Tom. Interesting result there. I'm going to attribute part of that to the fact that it might be the wording of the question of just being prepaid. Of course, if you're speaking about prepaid and you're including closed-loop prepaid with open-loop prepaid, then the answer is no, you don't need an FI. But we're speaking of open-loop prepaid here. And yes, you absolutely need a financial institution to be involved in open-loop prepaid. It's really, as spoken to earlier here, the ability to bring new stakeholders into the payment system and do so in a regulated manner is what's key about having a regulated financial institution involved. It ensures the proper oversight. The institution can be federally regulated or can be provincially regulated. Of course, if you're provincially regulated, you're only going to be issuing cards within your province. I'd say the majority of open-loop prepaid cards are regulated by federally are issued by federally regulated institutions. And federally regulated institutions adhere to both the federal regulations and the provincial regulations. We're looking to make sure that everything is followed closely, and this is very important for consumer protection. And by having this underlying support for the stakeholders, it ensures that there is called a level playing field of regulatory compliance out there, ensures that the consumer is protected. The regulatory bodies, the watchdogs that oversee, are like the federal FIs of the country. It's going to be OSFI, it's going to be FinTrack, it's going to be FCAC, and of course the network op regs themselves that we must adhere to in issuing the cards that really are followed very closely, and it's up to the FI to ensure that everything is compliant. We, of course, also adhere to the privacy and spam governments under PPIDA and under CASL, ensuring that privacy is maintained and that there isn't any egregious marketing campaigns and such. We have very aggressive anti-spam laws, and it has become an oversight point for the issuing entities now. The regulations are built right into the Bank Act, the Trust and Loan Companies Act, the Cooperative Credit Association Act, the Insurance Companies Act, and the regulations themselves are known as the Federal Prepaid Payment Products Regulations. They were introduced in 2014 after a good 3 years' worth of work and consultation with the stakeholders to ensure that they were well crafted to cover the many types of prepaid, as Dave has pointed out. You didn't want to use a single brushstroke to cover everything, so they are well done to make sure that people are protected, but that business is still permitted. A big piece of it, of course, as you hear in regulation in general, and very important with consumer protection, is disclosure. It's pre-disclosure to the customer, disclosure on the product itself, the availability of the information to the consumer to make sure they know what they're getting before they buy it, and that they understand it. In other words, the Commissioner Guidance CG3 applies the clear language of that disclosure. It's just not a matter of, yeah, I've written it in small print off to the side. It has to be done in a manner that you know the public can read it. And that is another key piece of what a regulated FI does, is make sure that all documentation and all collateral materials and such meet these regulations. And it's something that the stakeholders depend upon, because they have their business in mind. They know what they want to do, and they look to the FI to make sure that everything is kept compliant. The information that has to be disclosed includes things such as the issuer name itself, who is the FI, restrictions, any restrictions that may exist on the use of the product, all fees that apply and when they apply, insurance applicability, whether CDIC insurance is applicable or not. In general, you don't see that very often in prepaid, but there are opportunities and instances of it. Information about expiry of funds, if any, and generally the funds don't expire. There are a few exceptions. The terms and conditions of use, including the consumer's rights, must be disclosed to the individuals. Verification methods for the balances. They must be able to know what's left on their card and have access, whether it's online or through a telephone center, to be able to find out how much money is left on their card. They need to be educated that partial payments are allowed. In other words, if you approach the merchant, you're able to clear your card off in split tender, knowing that you can say, I want you to empty this card and I will pay with another tender afterwards. Making it clear to them, they know that they're able to do that with their prepaid product. And of course, giving them a method of staying in contact, so they need to have toll-free numbers to be able to contact. And generally there's a website associated with every prepaid product so that they can go in and look up whatever they may have been given to begin with. It'll also be included in a website for them. So the regulations cover initial disclosure, disclosure after the fact, if you're going to be making any changes to it, how those changes can be made, and notice to the cardholders if anything's going to change. Funds in general, as I commented earlier, do not expire. The plastic of the card itself might expire. That's a requirement, so it's a necessity of the card industry. There must be an expiry date for it to be able to be processed. The funds associated with the card do not expire, though. So you're able either to get another card issued to you or have a check cut to be able to reimburse you. But your funds are always available to you. No maintenance fees are allowed on cards for the first year. There are some exceptions if it's a promotional card. In other words, a corporation has invested in putting promotional funds out there. They're allowed to pull those funds back. Or if there's express consent, manifest express consent from the cardholder, then there may be fees that apply. But in general, it has to be at least 12 months before any sort of maintenance fee would apply to a card. And of course, no overdraft fees without express consent. The financial institution is ultimately responsible for everything. The program managers, the processor, card production, customer service, sales and marketing. The program manager may be the hub. They may be the business center that aggregate all of the services and really are at the forefront. But behind it all is the FI. And the FI is ultimately responsible for everything. No regulator wants to hear an FI say, oh goodness, well that was the program manager, or the processor did this, or, you know, it's irrelevant. We as the financial institution are absolutely responsible for everything, and we have to make sure that everybody is compliant. So we set up the card program with the networks. We provide compliance regulatory oversight. We do the safekeeping of the funds. We do the daily reconciliations and the settlements on the cards. We provide reporting. Cardholder escalations come to us. There are help desks provided through the program managers and processors, but it must be communicated that we are the ultimate escalation point for them. Of course, we know FCAC is an ultimate escalation point beyond us, But FCAC doesn't want to hear from anybody. They want to make sure that that customer was dealt with properly and that the FI has seen to that and make sure that proper process is followed and that the cardholders are educated that they have this process to follow. Ultimate accountability and liability for the card program, as I said, lay with the FI. Velocity controls are put in place to ensure the amount of money that goes onto the card or comes off to the card is controlled so that depending on the use of the card, mainly for AML reasons, you want to ensure that the frequency and the amount that it goes on or comes off is controlled through the platform. Depending on the type of card, those velocity controls change. As an example, an anonymous SLP gift card, a single load card that's hanging on a J-hook, those will have lower load limits or amount of money on them, say $200, $250 max, and you can't take those to an ATM and get money back off them. Again, it's an AML control. Whereas a GPR card, full KYC is done. You know your customer. Proper ID verification is done. And in those cases, you'll have greater velocity controls, and they will be able to use them ATMs, but you know who your client is now. So again, the controls are in place. Full PEP and sanction screening is done, just per any other banking regulation on any of the GPR cardholders. And of course, we then audit everything. The AML controls are audited, applicable law adherence is audited, contract adherence is audited, and due diligence on the ownership of the companies as well to make sure if it changes, we know that those that are involved in the industry are okay to be involved in the industry. I overuse the term at times, but I usually say one throat to choke. It's the FI. We are behind everything, and we regulate or adhere to regulations and make sure that we stay in control. You find anything wrong, you make sure that you're on top of it, you put a mitigation plan in place, and you get it corrected straight away. You do not allow this to carry on. Otherwise, organizations such as we've set up become useless. Our job is to make sure things are done well and that it is a nice, clean industry. So, like I said, compliance, oversight, safekeeping of funds, it's in line with all banking regulation. We got another poll question that we'd like to move to here. The Canadian government leads the world in electronic payments to citizens. True or false?
Interesting.
Back to you, Dave.
Okay, back to me. So since prepaid has launched in less than a decade, there's been all kinds of strides taken in terms of the regulatory and compliance and AML oversight, consumer protection that we didn't have when things first started out. But the key is to the average consumer and in fact the average stakeholder has no idea really at this point all of the efforts that have been done to protect consumers, to regulate the industry, and to protect the funds on the cards. So that's part of the mandate of the Canadian Prepaid Providers Organization, is to educate the general public and all the stakeholders and let them know and have a sense of comfort in terms of everything that has been done to create this emerging payment. We've talked a lot in the last couple days about the modernization of the Canadian payment system, and prepaid is integral to that. It is a way to fill in the cracks that debit and credit do not. It's a way to increase the efficiency of our payment systems by decreasing the inefficiencies of cash and check. Meanwhile, enhancing financial literacy within the general population for people who have been alienated by the existing financial system. For whatever reason it may be, we now have a product that they can use and now have financial inclusion back into our main payment systems. But again, it's up to our industry to make sure that we innovate and that we're able to get these products out that meet the consumer's needs in a cost-effective way. So there's still some big challenges facing the growth of prepaid in Canada. As we mentioned, the United States is at $246 billion and we're at $3 billion. And there's a number of reasons for those, and I'll go through a few of them. But 4 of them that I want to discuss right now is one of the biggest challenges we have is we've had new regulation that come in that is welcome. As the CPPO, we thought it was a great enhancement to the industry to clarify a lot of things, but there's still some confusion regarding it. And I'll give you an example. So the government separated or delineated prepaid cards into promotional and non-promotional. And that helped a lot to determine what the allowable fees would be for these types of products. But there's still some ambiguity. And an example would be the Canadian Red Cross. The Canadian Red Cross's mandate is they want to get money out to needy people, right? And they want to do that in the most effective way. And they very much wanted to use prepaid cards to do this. But the challenge for them is their card isn't a promotional card, nor is it a non-promotional card, right? For the Canadian Red Cross, it was important for them, if they've allocated funds to people and those funds are no longer required by those individuals, that the Red Cross can take those funds back and repurpose them for the people who are in need. The challenge, though, with the issuers is there isn't a clear delineation between the two and how the Red Cross fit into that. And that's an example where the Red Cross was not able to issue any cards for over a year's time, while Canadian issuers were trying to come up with a proper definition of where it fit in. So there's still some more work to be done with regards to reducing some of the ambiguity in the current regulations, and hopefully we get that with the next set of regulations coming out. The next one is the challenges interpreting anti-money laundering and KYC efforts on behalf of the issuers. As we know, our Canadian banking system is all about mitigation of risk. Prepaid is not a big category for them. And it's important for the banks then to ensure that whatever products that they put out there really have as little risk as possible to that financial institution relative to the reward, and the reward is still relatively small. The challenge, though, is that because it's a new product, because it's still relatively small and unknown, there's a lack of understanding and awareness of the required anti-money laundering requirements within a certain amount of products. And as such, there's been significant delays by the issuing organizations and the AML teams versus the product teams who want to get products out there to come up with an understanding of what the right level of anti-money laundering requirements would be for that issuing institution. And we've seen firsthand how products have been delayed anywhere from a month to a year in getting out to market, right? It's really important for us, if there's a demand out there, that we can actually service that demand. So as the Canadian Prepaid Providers Organization, we are actually providing some best practices to the industry that anyone can approach our organization and ask best practices and collaborate with us to find out and learn more about what other organizations are doing within Canada and around the world to help out with the anti-money laundering. The other challenge is the business case and the financials for such. So we saw 11 categories within prepaid. It's the same platform, right? It's the exact same platform. We've got reloadable cards and non-reloadable cards, and really that's the only delineation. And once you have an issuing platform, it's just a matter of changing some of the elements within the bin at the financial institution to service the market. However, people buy in a different way, and you have to market in a different way. And now we've got 11 categories of a relatively small segment that we need to service. And that presents a lot of challenges for banks, particularly the large ones who are used to 2 categories and have a much, much greater degree of volume on them, right? So the business cases are tough. One of the ways that we can get over that is to have greater communication within larger financial institutions so that they can actually share and offset the costs. Typically, categories within large financial institutions have to have their own business case, and it has to be profitable according to their business case versus actually sharing the platform across many divisions within the bank that would actually decrease the financial barriers to offering much more targeted, segmented products, right? So having that communication and sharing the platform expense would help for the larger banks to issue the products. And then finally, it's just continued innovation. There is a demand. We know there's a demand. We hear it all the time. Our organization does polls of what people are looking for, particularly millennials, for budgeting items. we don't have an effective youth and student card in the marketplace today. Right? So we need to innovate. We need to work within the ecosystem, with the networks, with the issuers, with the program managers, to actually figure out a product and get it out to market to meet that demand, because we're missing it as an industry right now. So those are the 4 big challenges. That's what we're working on as an industry. We think, again, greater education, awareness, communications among all the stakeholders in terms of how to meet the needs within the market will benefit the consumers, will benefit the government organizations and the business organizations who want to make their payments more effective that don't fit into credit and debit. Okay, so we'll open it up to questions right now. Yes.
Are the prepaids also available in American dollars? So can I take a card from like a financial institution, prepaid, and load it with American dollars and send it to Canadian Prepaid? Is that, like, what happens?
So, great question. For those who didn't hear, the question was, can you purchase a prepaid card denominated in US dollars? So one of the categories of prepaid that we have in this market, and in fact has blossomed in several other markets around the world, is travel card. So the idea there being that, some people when they travel, there's certain needs that they have, like they want to have assurance as to what their exchange rate is. They want to be able to lock it in advance and know exactly how much they have in that foreign currency to be able to spend. Some people are worried about using their main credit or debit card while they travel for security reasons. So the travel card category helps meet some of those needs. And so today in Canada, you can buy cards denominated in different currencies. You can get a USD card, you can get Euro, British pounds, as well as Canadian. Very soon, we'll be seeing multi-currency cards, so a single card that can house, say 7 different currencies, and you can load them at once or at different times. And as you travel around, the card is effectively smart enough to know where it's being used and pull money from the correct bucket of funds. So the way it works is that you would purchase that card and you would do your exchange right at the time of purchase and loading or reloading. So well, I mean, the main use case right now is for personal use. If you're thinking more along the lines of a gift card. Yeah, so today the main way you would do that is to actually purchase a card in the US, which you could do online, right? And then you would, as you purchase that card, the foreign exchange would happen at the time of purchase. That would be from a US bank, so you'd be buying it from a US provider. Or purchase it with your credit or debit card, the way you would make an e-commerce purchase off of Amazon in the US. You would buy the card, and so on your credit card statement, it would say, you bought a $50 US card that equates to $75 Canadian, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, when you purchase reloadable cards, you need to register the card to yourself to meet the KYC requirements. As such, if you are buying that reloadable card, that card is associated to you as a person, right? It's not meant to be given to another person, much like a credit card is not meant to be given to another person for their use. That's what the gift cards are for, the single load cards, because you do not necessarily need to register it to an individual. So that might be a better use for what you're looking for.
But to answer the question, no, you do not generally buy a gift card off the rack in U.S. funds. No.
For the prepaid component, is the prepaid card actually like a credit card in terms of purchasing online and you add it to a mobile wallet?
In general, yes, it is a network branded open loop card, operates just like a credit card. That is part of the major difference between it and a closed loop card is it's usable anywhere the card is accepted.
We had a question in the back, yeah.
The processors are regulated by the FI because the processor is, again, the one throat to choke, so the processor is just one of the contractors in the segment. How many processors in Canada? Well, I think you're going to find the majority of the processors are in the US, but in Canada itself, I can think of 2 right off the bat. But I know within our organization, we work with, I think, 6 different processors, and that's part of the flexibility that needs to come into the market, is that you can work with all the various stakeholders.
And just to add to that, in addition to being managed by the issuer, the processors also have to be certified by the payment network.
The information, it is part of the disclosure to the cardholder that they know their funds, or not their funds, their information may be held outside the borders, and that is part of the disclosure, yes.
Okay. So I've got the red light flashing at us, which means we need to wrap up the discussion. We're around afterwards for anyone who has any further questions. Again, our information is available to everyone, so feel free to contact any one of us. We are members of the Canadian Prepaid Providers Organization, and again, our mandate is education and awareness. That's our job, so please feel free to contact us with any questions that you have with the industry. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.